In the cold embrace of the north, where icy winds pierce to the bone and fjords cut deep into the harsh land, legends are born. One such legend tells of Scotty, known as the Eye of Tyr, whose name resonated like a final judgment. His arrows, as if an extension of the god's will, always found their mark, bringing victories to the North Wolves clan and striking terror into the hearts of their enemies. But even legends come with a price, and Scotty yearned for peace, a tranquility inaccessible to warriors of his caliber. Hanging up his bow, he hoped to forget the blood and glory. Yet fate, as is known, is fickle. The wind carried news of betrayal, of his clan's capture and enslavement. Now, Scotty faced a choice: to save his people or to forever renounce his past. The story of his life was shrouded in mystery. Found as an infant on a riverbank, wrapped in wolf pelts, Scotty grew up among the warriors of the Wolf clan. Some whispered of his divine origins, while others saw him merely as an orphan, abandoned to the whims of fate. But the clan accepted him, and from childhood he learned that strength and loyalty were the foremost virtues of a Viking. Unlike his peers, Scotty chose the bow. He trained tirelessly in all weather, honing his marksmanship to perfection. His talent did not go unnoticed. By the age of 13, he was defeating adult warriors in tournaments, and at 15 he led the hunt. But true glory came in his first battle, when the seemingly doomed wolves were surrounded by enemies. It was then that Scotty's arrows, as if sent by the gods, turned the tide of the battle, striking down enemy after enemy without a single miss. From that day forward, he was called the Eye of Tyr, with the belief that his vision pierced the veil of reality and that the god of war guided his arrows. Battle after battle, his legend grew, inspiring fear and awe. In the distant north, in a land of eternal winter, the legend of the Wolf clan was born. These were not mere Vikings, but ruthless hunters whose attacks resembled a wolf pack, organized, precise, and lethal. They studied their enemy, waited for the opportune moment, and struck with relentless fury. The wolves valued strategy, cooperation, and loyalty. Every warrior knew their place in the formation like a wolf in a pack. Unlike other tribes, they surrounded their enemies, forced them into mistakes, and delivered a devastating blow. Their movements were like shadows emerging from fog or the darkness of night. The Wolf clan was not just a military force, but a society built on strength and survival. The Jarl was chosen not by birthright, but by valor and wisdom proven in battle. Weakness was punished with death, and betrayal was considered the gravest crime. Training began at an early age. At 7, children were sent into the forest, where they had to survive alone. Those who returned showing weakness were stripped of the right to bear arms. Only the strong became warriors, and only warriors could be called wolves. At 12, combat training began. Young men and women fought each other, honing their weapon skills. The best were sent to the forge, where they learned to craft swords and spears. At 15, their first battle awaited, where alongside veterans, they had to prove their courage. Death in battle was considered an honor and cowardice a disgrace. And among these warriors, Scotty stood out, seemingly chosen by the gods themselves. His vision was sharper, his reflexes quicker, his mind more calculating. While others trained with swords, he mastered the bow and his arrows flew true to their mark. Soon, the elders began to whisper that he was blessed by Tyr, the god of war and justice, and that Scotty was destined to become his instrument in the world of men. When enemies saw him on the battlefield, realizing their leader would fall first and their warriors would be struck down before they could raise their shields, they named him the Eye of Tyr. This moniker spread like wildfire. It was said that he foresaw the future, that his arrows were inevitable, for he saw the end before the beginning. His deadly projectiles always found the hearts of those destined to fall. Many dared to challenge this legend, but their fate was unchanging. They fell prostrate, struck down by a black arrow that pierced their skull. Under Scotty's leadership, the Wolf clan reached unprecedented heights. No settlement could withstand them, no fortress could stop them. For years, they sailed uncharted seas, raided distant kingdoms, and invariably returned with the richest spoils, gold, weapons, slaves, and glory. With each victory, their name instilled terror across ever wider lands. The wolves crushed entire fortifications without suffering a single defeat. They were swift, merciless, and led by an archer whose arrows never missed. Thanks to Scotty, who eliminated enemy commanders even before the battle began, opposing forces lost their organization, and the pack surged into the fight. This was a hunting war where the wolves were ruthless predators, but the higher the flight, the harder the fall. Scotty began to notice that the Wolf clan was no longer what it once was. The Jarl no longer fought for glory, but was consumed by greed. Battles were waged not to strengthen the clan, but to satisfy an insatiable thirst for gold. The once cohesive pack was transforming into a gathering of hungry wolves, squabbling over carrion. The archer, who had dedicated his life to serving the gods and his people, began to be tormented by the question, how many more deaths would it take? How long could his soul endure this bloodlust? It was then that Scotty made a decision. He would lay down his bow and leave the path of war to find peace. But no wolf can leave the pack without consequences. Scotty's decision to abandon war and a life of raiding was met with grave silence. When he announced his choice before the Council of Elders, the gazes fixed upon him expressed not respect, but deep mistrust. For the wolves, a warrior who left the battle was not just a person departing, it was a broken link in the chain that bound them. He was at the peak of his power, his reflexes were lightning fast, his vision discerned the movement of an arrow cutting through the wind as if time slowed down. His muscles, hardened by years of battle, were a formidable weapon in themselves. But there was something stronger, something that could not be trained, the burden of time and the yearning for a different life. Scotty was not naive. He understood that a warrior of the Wolf clan was not permitted to simply lay down arms and leave. But with each battle, he felt that he was fighting not for the clan, but for a growing emptiness within himself. The gold he accumulated, the glory he won, the blood he shed, nothing brought him satisfaction. And so, he made his decision. He would travel east to lands that merchants spoke of in their journeys. They said the rivers there were golden at sunset, and the mountains held forests that had never known the smell of blood. He did not know if he would find peace there, but he hoped that there he could rediscover himself beyond the image of a warrior. His plan was simple: leave the pack before they could stop him. For weeks, Scotty secretly prepared for his departure, gathering supplies and choosing a path that bypassed clan patrols. His arrows, once used for killing, now had to ensure his survival away from war. But on the night he prepared to leave, something made him hesitate. Sitting by the fire, he watched the other warriors, those with whom he had fought side by side for years, men he once considered brothers. What would become of them after he left? Would the clan stand, or would it be consumed by the Jarl's growing lust for conquest? In recent years, Scotty had noticed subtle changes in his leader. Hakon, the Jarl of the Wolf clan, was no longer a fierce warrior fighting shoulder to shoulder with his men. His armor shone brighter than his axe. His hands more often held cups of mead than swords, and, worst of all, his gaze was fixed not on battle, but on riches, thrones, and secret agreements whispered in the darkness. Scotty was not the only one who noticed this, but no one dared to ask questions. In the world of the wolves, the Jarl's word was the only law, and those who disagreed, they simply disappeared. But Scotty had no time for reflection. Not anymore. For the first time, he chose himself, not the clan. Before the first rays of the sun illuminated the camp, Scotty was gone. His bow was on his back, a bone wolf amulet hung around his neck, and his thoughts were set on the east. He did not know what awaited him, but he was certain of one thing: he would not look back. While Scotty headed east, Hakon, the Jarl of the Wolf clan, was already hatching his own plans. The clan's people, eager for spoils and glory, were unaware of the shadows gathering around them. While they fought, drank, and celebrated their victories, the clan's blood was being sold in silence. In the magnificent court of King Albert, ruler of the South, where gold flowed like rivers and false promises sounded sweeter than wine, intrigues were woven and treacherous alliances were forged. Albert, an ambitious monarch, saw the Wolf clan as a constant threat to his reign. That is why a vile deal was struck. Hakon was offered to betray his people, to weaken the clan from within, in exchange for not only a pardon, but also a generous reward. Rivers of gold were to flow to his feet, lands would come into his possession, and from a fearsome barbarian chieftain, he would transform into a respected lord. But betrayal always has its price, and as Scotty departed into the unknown, the fate of the Wolf clan was already being decided in the dark corridors of power. 3 long years of continuous battles and harsh trials left an indelible mark on the Wolf clan, and the absence of their celebrated warrior was particularly felt. Scotty had gone east, leaving his homeland where he had fought, lived, and triumphed. His decision would inevitably impact the fate of the entire clan, but the story of Hakon, the Jarl, was only just beginning its tragic turn. For the winds of fate are especially fickle when it comes to excessive ambition, and the wise King Albert understood this perfectly. Hakon, always cunning and treacherous, realized that his moment had come and could not afford to hesitate. The details of his secret pact with Albert began to take concrete shape in the shadows of his own stronghold. It was a dirty deal, and Hakon knew it, but in return, he was offered something greater than he could have imagined. With a greedy glint in his eyes, Albert promised untold riches, vast lands in his eastern domains, and even autonomy in governing the people who would fall under his rule. The price, however, was the simple surrender of his own people, the clan's warriors, his loyal comrades, into slavery to King Albert. This was to be a kind of tribute, a payment for the promised greatness. In his imagination, Hakon already saw treasures piling at his feet and anticipated the future of his lineage, which he intended to build on the blood of his kin. The deal was sealed in a dark hall, far from the curious eyes of his people, far from the clan's gaze. Albert, looking Hakon directly in the eyes, assured him that with his help, the kingdom's borders would expand even further, crushing any resistance in its path. However, the price would be high, and the consequences for those who once served under Hakon would be horrific. But the Jarl, blinded by the lust for power and wealth, sealed the agreement with an icy handshake that held no remorse. Hakon became a rich man, but in his soul, the burden of betrayal began to corrode the remnants of his honor. Meanwhile, in the east, Scotty's journey began. The man who struck terror on battlefields, the archer whose arrow never missed, had now chosen a completely different path. In the harsh and boundless eastern lands, Scotty found a new purpose. Years of glory in battles, where his accuracy and skill brought the greatest victories and rich spoils, were in the past. In his new life, he became a protector of trade caravans, ensuring the safety of trade routes winding through mountains and forests. He was no longer a warrior fighting in open combat, but a shadow guarding lives and property. His time in the East changed him. He forged a new reputation for himself, not as a slayer of warriors, but as a guardian of caravans. Scotty fought bandits and robbers with the same skill with which he once struck down enemies on the battlefield. But now, his arrows did not sow death. they protected. He felt the weight of the choice he had made, leaving his old life behind, but at the same time, he felt the freedom he had gained. His fame as an invincible archer quickly spread throughout the eastern lands, and soon his name became a symbol of safety and reliability. However, the East held its secrets, and in its shadows, something Scotty could not yet decipher lay hidden, something that called him to an even greater destiny. But as always, he would not miss the arrow he was about to unleash. Hakon's decision, like Scotty's new life, was only beginning to intertwine with their future. The balance between loyalty and ambition was becoming increasingly fragile. Scotty led a modest life in the East, devoid of grand exploits. He was a caravan guardian, protecting those who traversed the endless plains and treacherous mountain trails. He was not a hero or a man seeking glory, but simply a skilled warrior diligently performing his duty. His life was quiet and unremarkable, far from the glory any warrior might crave. One day, as he prepared for another journey, a young messenger approached him, exhausted and with a troubled expression. She carried a letter, and the seal on it was unmistakable, the symbol of the Wolf clan, his people. Scotty's heart constricted with a grim premonition. He broke the seal and read words that burned his mind like a branding iron. "Scotty, son of the Wolf clan, we call to you. Jarl Hakon has made a deal with King Albert. He betrayed the Wolf clan in exchange for wealth and a life of ease, away from battles and suffering. Our people are captured and enslaved. The price of our freedom was our souls. Only you can break this pact and free us." The words echoed in his head, and Scotty's rage knew no bounds. Hakon, the Jarl he had known, had betrayed his people for gold and a comfortable life. There was no honor, no dignity in this, only a shameful bargain. The fury that engulfed Scotty was like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. His people, the Wolf clan, now lived under Albert's rule, pawns in a dirty game for power. Without a second thought, Scotty let the letter fly on the wind and began his preparations. He gripped his bow firmly, mounted his horse, and his heart blazed with a new, unyielding resolve. The serene life in the East, which had once seemed so important, now paled in the face of the need to free his people from oppression. Time waited for no one, and every second counted. He directed his steed north, not casting a single glance back. The road ahead promised to be long and full of dangers, but Scotty knew what he had to do. Hakon's treacherous pact had to be broken. The Wolf clan had to regain its freedom, and he would be the one to restore justice. Not for glory or accolades, but in the name of restoring what was right. Overcoming all obstacles, Scotty reached the harsh northern lands, where an icy wilderness stretched before him. The path to this goal was thorny and arduous. Piercing winds and treacherous trails tested his endurance, but anger and determination fueled his strength. Scotty's heart beat in unison with a single purpose: to tear his people from the shackles of slavery and restore the honor of the Wolf clan, defiled by Hakon's dirty deal with King Albert. Finally, he reached the place that seemed to be his clan's prison. Neither Jarl Hakon nor King Albert was anywhere to be seen, but Scotty's keen eye could not be mistaken. Heavily armed guards stood watch over the makeshift camp. The Wolf clan was there, captive but alive, and the sight of them brought a crushing weight of shame upon Scotty's shoulders. The sight of his brothers and sisters, chained and surrounded by mercenaries, burned his soul with an unquenchable fire. For a moment, Scotty stood motionless, like a statue. His eyes, sharp as razor blades, felt a wave of anger rise within him, a righteous fury ignited by what had been done to his people. But instead of a cry or a reckless charge, a sinister smirk appeared on his face. He knew exactly what he had to do. With mastery worthy of the Eye of Tyr himself, Scotty drew his quiver and carefully selected his arrows. Each one was an extension of his will, charged with the wrath of a man betrayed by those he should have trusted. He crouched, taking an ideal position, and with deadly precision began his lethal hunt. Arrows, as if unleashed by the very elements, flew with incredible speed, striking targets without fail. The gods had no chance to react. It seemed as though a deadly rain had fallen from the heavens, swift and relentless. The sound of falling bodies became the only response to Scotty's actions. Not a single god escaped his wrath, as if death itself had become their shadow. When the last of the gods collapsed to the ground, Scotty slowly rose. The sound of battle faded, and an ominous silence descended. The wolf clan, still bound by chains, was free. Scotty approached them, bow in hand, but his expression remained cold and impassive, as if the fight had been merely an insignificant step towards something greater. He looked into the eyes of his brothers and sisters, now free, and spoke in a firm voice. "Now we go for Hakon. He will answer for defiling our clan's honor." Scotty knew the journey was not yet over. The real battle still lay ahead, and it would be fought not against mercenaries or gods. Hakon and Albert would face the true might of a man's vengeance, a man whose clan had been sold for empty promises of power. Scotty would not rest until the honor of the wolf clan was restored, and he would be the steel that broke the chains enslaving his people. After the liberation of the wolf clan, the tension in the air was almost palpable. Scotty, known as the Eye of Tyr, carefully watched his brothers and sisters, now free but exhausted by long captivity and slavery. The clan had endured unbearable suffering, and simply saving them was not enough. They needed to regain their strength, to restore not only their bodies, but the spirit of every warrior. The following weeks were dedicated to their revival. There were no noisy celebrations, no shouts of victory. Everyone was consumed by the need to reclaim their warrior status. The captives' wounds were treated immediately, but psychological recovery proved to be the most challenging task. Many were humiliated. Others had lost faith in their own abilities. But Scotty, always firm and relentless, knew that the real battle would unfold not on the battlefield, but in the soul of each of his kin. In time, the clan's strength regenerated from within. Training fires blazed again, and the sound of clashing metal echoed through the camp. Scotty, as a silent leader, was present at every stage, watching as the men and women of the wolf clan rose again, as if the past had never been. A fire burned in his eyes, a fire of war, a flame that had been extinguished by the betrayal of Hakon and Albert, but now roared with renewed intensity, fueled by rage and a thirst for vengeance. Days passed, and the clan's warriors gradually regained their strength, though not without losses. The food was simple but nourishing, and the training demanded more than just physical prowess. It required the awakening of the fighting spirit, the one that never gives up, the one that will not bow before any tyrant. However, Scotty did not allow himself to relax. He knew that time was an enemy, as dangerous as any blade, and that Hakon and Albert would not remain silent for long. The plan for revenge was forged in secret, and the hour of reckoning was relentlessly approaching. An ambush would be their only chance. Days followed, filled with meticulous preparation. Scotty, like an experienced strategist, reorganized his forces, dividing them into mobile units and training each warrior in the art of guerrilla warfare and sudden attacks. This was not about a frontal clash, but a lightning-fast and deadly strike. Like shadows, they were to glide in the darkness, like a pack of hungry wolves, ready to tear apart the enemy before they even realized the impending threat. Confidence grew, and focus strengthened, and after several weeks of intense training, Scotty gathered his clan, ready for the decisive moment. Hakon and Albert, mired in their overconfidence, had no idea what fate awaited them. Hakon's betrayal had to be paid in blood. With a clear plan in mind, Scotty looked into the eyes of each warrior, now transformed and ready for battle. The smirk that had flickered on his face after their liberation was replaced by an expression of unwavering determination. They would descend upon the enemy with full fury, and this time there would be no mercy. The sharp northern wind bit at the faces of the Wolf Clan warriors as they prepared for the final thrust. Scotty led the charge, his eyes burning with the certainty of imminent retribution. After long weeks of preparation and ambushes, the hour of reckoning had arrived. The plan was simple and brutal. Hakon and Albert, blinded by pride, had arranged a secret meeting to sign a false peace treaty. A hypocritical move designed to lull the growing rebellion into complacency. But they did not know that this act would be their last display of perfidy. Scotty and his warriors, like ghosts, lay hidden in the shadows of the trees, preparing for the deadly strike. They knew that the slightest mistake could cost them their lives, but the leader of the Wolf Clan was unyielding. He had seen his people suffering, the pain that betrayal had brought. Nothing mattered but one thing: to destroy those who had defiled his honor and the honor of everyone who had trusted him. The camp was practically empty, with only a handful of Hakon's and Albert's guards on duty. Scotty, like a predator, surveyed the area, his bow ready for battle. He understood he had no room for error. The warriors, like shadows, took strategic positions, ready to strike the enemy at any moment. At a signal, a barrage of arrows rained down on the camp, like a relentless storm. Albert's and Hakon's mercenaries and bodyguards had no time to react, falling one after another under a hail of deadly arrows. Quietly, like shadows dissolving into the night, Hakon, the traitor who had sold his clan for wealth and power, tried to resist, but in vain. He was surrounded on all sides. King Albert, steeped in his arrogance, looked at Scotty and realized the fatal mistake he had made. "You have no honor." "Never did," Albert croaked, trying to rise, but his words were drowned out by the rasping sound of an arrow piercing his throat. The king's death was instantaneous and brutal, but in Scotty's eyes, there was not a trace of compassion. He had sworn vengeance, and there would be no mercy. Hakon tried to flee, but his attempts were futile. Scotty caught him, his eyes burning with hatred and a thirst for justice. The former Jarl of the Wolf Clan was helpless, his life fading in the hands of those he had betrayed. Scotty did not hesitate. Hakon's death became a symbol of the pain and betrayal the clan had endured over the long years. As the bodies of Albert and Hakon lay on the ground, Scotty stood over them, like the embodiment of retribution. The Wolf Clan warriors surrounded him, their faces expressing a mixture of pain, relief, and deep respect. The silence was deafening, only the cold wind disturbed it, sweeping across the battlefield. Vengeance had been exacted, but the future still remained uncertain. The clan warriors approached Scotty, and in every gaze, he saw support and loyalty. They knew what this meant. Scotty was more than just the Eye of Tyr. He had become the new Jarl of the Wolf Clan, chosen for his strength, courage, and unwavering resolve. And though the blood of Hakon and Albert had not yet cooled on the ground, Scotty understood that the most difficult trial was still ahead. With his ascent to power, the Wolf Clan rose from the ashes. Scotty was to rule with the strength of a man hardened by pain, but also with the wisdom gained through experience. He had to unite the men and women of the clan to lead them into a new era where there would be no place for betrayal, only loyalty and honor. The Eye of Tyr now led the Wolf Clan, and under his leadership, they were to become stronger than ever before. For many years, Scotty ruled the clan with a firm hand and a brave heart. He became a living legend, a symbol of respect and power. His name echoed across the northern lands, and the winter winds whispered his story, no longer as the tale of a man consumed by vengeance, but as the story of a leader of a reborn clan, a people who would never bow their heads again.